Yeah, a second.
One
Okay.
of the things I wanted to raise while we're talking about Corona, because who isn't talking about Corona today, is
Exactly.
how it affects women. And my daughter has certainly felt the impact quite severely because she's a postdoctoral fellow trying to churn out articles in political science, and instead what she's doing is being a full-time homemaker because her husband is at home working out of their bedroom, and that means she has to try and keep the house as quiet as possible and to
Right.
keep up morale in the family.
Right. So it's always that way. Like, in other words, that, as soon as there's a crisis, who steps in? Who has to put themselves aside? Who has to put aside all of our ideas, ambitions, work, thoughts about the way the world should be? We come second. We come second. So part of the reason why I want to do this conversation about our lives and about gender in a non-confrontational way, I'm not out there leading demonstrations or anything like that. I want to just talk about it and make sure that we have somewhere where we can talk about women's real lives and women's real processing. Because it's true, I have the same feeling as your daughter a little bit, which is that we have 7 people living in our house now. Thank God, I'm really blessed. It's kids and extensions and a niece and a daughter-in-law, and so I'm spending a lot of my time managing food, making sure we have enough food for everyone, making sure that we have, that we have enough in storage and that we're able to go to the McCullough. And I'm turning, and I'm not working now, right? Because I left my job in January to run for Knesset. And then my plan was, after I run for Knesset, to go and build my business again, my writing business. And we went straight from Knesset to this completely unstable world. So I really have no idea what I'm going to be doing next after Corona. I don't know what the world is going to look like after Corona. And so right now I'm just embracing what is, which is completely at home, 100% at home, taking care of everyone. Okay.
Well, just out of curiosity, how are you taking care of yourself during this period?
That is the question that I think a lot of women are asking themselves, or maybe not asking themselves, but it's a really important question about looking after ourselves. For me, spending an hour teaching a class on feminist bibliotherapy, that is looking after myself, reminding myself that I am, I'm a scholar and a thinker and a teacher. So, for whatever it is, even if it's just, a small class online for people who want to take a break and talk about the things that matter. Okay,
So
so let's
let's
get
talk
started.
about what's on today's agenda
Okay.
and both derive enrichment and pleasure from it and
I'm in.
respite.
Fantastic. Okay, so today I'm just sort of going in order of reading the text. And we'll keep reading the text until either Corona is over or the Bible is over, whichever comes first. So, and of course, Genesis is rich with women's stories. So we started out talking about Eve, and the theme in Eve was about how the story of Eve is at the root of a lot of patriarchy. Then we talked about Sarah and Hagar and what happens to women living under patriarchy and how women treat one another and how women could be agents of the patriarchy like that, which is very painful. It's a very painful reality. Then we went to Rivka, where we saw a woman who was marvelous. She was energetic and full of agency and energy and rushing and moving and doing and thinking. How she became the wife and the mother, and towards the end of her life did something that seems pretty terrible, but she did it because she was trapped in all those patriarchal structures. And so that raises a lot of questions about what happens to women who are even incredible women who are working within boundaries why do women sometimes take perhaps manipulative or dishonest or deceitful or quiet or behind the scenes kind of actions, which is very real in my life. 25 years I've been a feminist activist, and I've been involved with a lot of women's organizations, and I've seen, even in women's and feminist organizations, terrible things that women do to each other, even in the name of feminism. I've seen a lot of that, and it's very painful to me. Even most recently in the women's party that we ran, I wrote an article about some of it for the Independent last week, but I didn't even share that article on social media because nobody wants to be talking about that. Everybody just wants to be talking about Corona. So I figured I'm going to share that article after Corona is over. Anyway, the next story tonight is about Rachel and Leah. And so I want to start with a question, because Rachel and Leah comes up whenever I ask this question, they always come up. The question is, does the Bible pass the Bechdel test? Do you know what the Bechdel test is?
Nope. Tell me
Okay.
about it.
The Bechdel test is a tool for analyzing the status of women in movies. The Bechdel test looks at movies and says, it's a very simple test. In this movie, are there two named women who talk to each other for at least 30 seconds about something other than a man? So now it's a pretty low bar for saying, okay, yes, this movie is good for women. It's a pretty low bar. It's not saying, oh, are there 50-50 women and men? Are there two lead characters, a woman and a man? Do men and women have equal numbers of speaking parts? It doesn't even ask, it doesn't even go that far. It's the lowest possible bar. Do we have two women? Do we have more than one woman? Right? Because if there's one woman, then she's like a token. She's what's called a smurfette, right? That you have all the smurfs and one smurfette. It's like, oh, look how great we are. We have a smurfette kind of thing. So the Bechdel test basically says, let's move on, let's move beyond the smurfette. Or for instance, let's think about the movie, the show MASH. Did you watch the show MASH in the 1970s and 80s?
Yes, occasionally.
Okay, so MASH is a classic example of the smurfette syndrome. MASH had exactly one woman on staff, Hot Lips Houlihan, and they called her Hot Lips, okay? She was totally known for her sexuality. And her whole role, her whole character was the one who was constantly having to rebuff advances from the stars. You know, Alan Alda, he was the star. It's classic, okay, where a show is basically all men, and you have one woman, and her job is to be, you know, the love interest or the sex object or something. Or like there are zillions of movies like this, you know, like Indiana Jones or Crocodile Dundee, all of these movies that basically, or James Bond, all of these, you know, these movies are basically movies all about men. And there's one woman character somewhere whose job is to be pretty or to be the Bond woman or to be the love interest, you like sort of, okay. So the Bechdel test is trying to take women's characters and stories one step further and say, okay, if we have two women actually having a conversation about something other than a man, for just 30 seconds, it passes. Now, most movies really don't pass, but it's a really interesting tool. So now the question that I ask is, does the Bible pass the Bechdel test?
Occasionally.
Where?
I'm thinking of Ruth and Naomi.
Ruth and Naomi, right. Ruth and Naomi. Ruth and Naomi is it. Where else? If we take aside Ruth and Naomi, which is all the way like towards the end, you know, it's in Ketuvim, in like the third section of the Bible. The 5 books of the Torah. Do the 5 books of the Torah pass the Bechdel test?
You see, my suspicions, as opposed to my knowledge, would say, since you're asking that question in the context of a discussion of Rivka and Leah, then something must have happened that I didn't notice. So I hope my suspicions are correct.
Well, I don't know. You know, what I want to see tonight is we have a story with 2 women. There are only a couple of places where there's more than one woman. So we can also talk about, let's say, the story of Miriam and Paro's daughter, where Miriam, they have a very brief exchange, but the entire exchange is about Moshe, and the story is about Moshe. So those are two women who have like a one verse each, pretty much, but that's already in Exodus. I'm just jumping ahead. The only place in the Bible where we have two women who are central to the drama is in the Rachel and Leah story. And so the question that I want to ask is, what are they talking about? Are they talking about a man, or are they talking about something else? If we can establish tonight that they were talking about something other than a man, then we could say, okay, thanks to Rachel and Leah, the Bible passes the Bechdel test. But if ultimately it's talking about a man, then all right, so should we get started?
Sure, I'm waiting for you to flash some text on the screen.
Okay, here we go. So tonight the chapter that we're looking at is chapter 30, Genesis chapter 30. Okay, so you want me to share the screen again? We'll do the
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll share the screen. Okay, hang on a second. Share screen. Here we go. All right. Okay, so we have the story of, the backdrop to the story is, of course, that Jacob had to run away from home because he stole the birthright from his brother Esau with Rebekah's help, and he ran away. Okay, and then and he ran away up north to Haran, and now it's time for him to look for a wife. So, okay, I want to read some of the story from the beginning, because I want to point something out that before we get to the story of Rachel and Leah. So it says, he went east, and he came to a well. And the reason why this is significant is because of what I said the other day, which is that so many of these like love stories in the Bible take place by wells. And the story of Rebecca also took place by a well. And so since they both took place at wells, I thought it would be interesting to compare a little bit of the two. So here, okay, so he saw 3 flocks of sheep, and a huge rock was covering the well. And what did he do? And the flocks would gather, and they would roll the rock off the mouth of the well and water the sheep. Then would return the rock. And he said to them, in the end, he rolled the rock off. Okay, but before then, this is what's happening around the well when he says, he's looking for Lavan, his uncle. So he says to them, do you know my uncle Lavan? Mm-hmm. And they said, yes, we know him, and his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. Okay, and he said, the day is long. Okay, he said, the day is long. It is not time to take the livestock, water the sheep, and go to pasture. And they said, we can't do that until all the flocks are gathered, and they will roll the rock off the well, and then we'll water the sheep. And while he was talking to them, that's when Rachel came with the son, with the sheep, her father's sheep.
I'm sort of surprised, actually, that the women were taking care of the sheep, because there were a lot of wild animals back then, mm-hmm. And I would normally have expected men to have the job of shepherding.
Well, we do see that there are a lot of men here shepherding, but we also see that the well was a place where women and men gathered together. The well was a place where both women and men were there. That was the case with Rebecca, that it was a place where women were there and men were there in different roles, but women were in charge of water. Today in Africa, in India, many places in the world, women are still in charge of water. You see everywhere around the world, it's women who are gathering the water. So that happened where the men came with the sheep and the women came with the water. But what was interesting is that here, as opposed to the story of Rebecca, the story of Rebecca, by reading this story, we appreciate a little bit more even how independent-minded Rebecca was. Like, she came alone, and she came and she went and she hurried, and she spoke. and she had initiative and she had agency. Whereas here we see Rachel much more in that sort of quiet, passive role. You know, she came, she was her father, she was tending to things for her father. She wasn't speaking, she was doing her father's work. Well, she was a shepherdess also. So she was, in that sense, she was a little bit in that man's world, like what you were saying. She was taking care of her father's sheep. So the story revolves much more around her father than Rivka's story. Rivka's story was very much about her, but here Rachel's story is much more about how she's serving her father. So that's my reading of it. But you're right. I think you're 100% right to point out that she's in this man's world doing this man's work. Okay, so we keep going. And Rachel shows up. Okay, so she shows up. She's the shepherdess. Okay, so now Yaakov sees Rachel, his cousin. Okay, and again it says she's the daughter of Lavan, the brother of his mother, and Lavan Achimo. In other words, it keeps emphasizing here that she was the daughter of Lavan. And here Yaakov comes and he moves that big rock. So as opposed to the Rivka story where we saw that Rivka was doing all the work. She was doing all the work, she was doing all the talking, she was doing all the acting. Here, Yaakov is doing all the work, right? Jacob is doing all the work. He's the one who's showing his muscles, you know, he's moving the rock and he's doing it, and he's seeing in Rachel his cousin. He's not, as opposed to Rivka, who was very much Rivka, here, Rachel is very much Rachel, the daughter of the brother of his mother. So
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
And the question has to do with the fact that we're being told specifically that Lavan is the mother's brother, the maternal side of the family. How then are the paternal versus the maternal sides of family valorized?
So that is absolutely fascinating. I mean, I think it's absolutely fascinating that there's much more fluidity in this story than we're used to. Like when we read all the chapters about Toldot, about the lineage, the stories of lineage that are incorporated in mostly in Genesis, but throughout most of the Tanakh, the stories of lineage are very much father to son, father to son, father to son, man to man to man to man to man to man to man. But actually, much of our lineage comes here from the mother's side. Here, it's a relative from Rivka, and so it's not quite that patrilineal, that lineage that way. But also, today the rabbinic system turned Judaism into matrilineal descent. That the only real way to know if someone's Jewish, is through the mother's side. So we have these very conflicting traditions. On the one hand, for most of the Bible, only the men's names are mentioned as, counting. Only the men's line matters. At the same time, in halakhic history, only the woman's line determines your essential Jewishness, as it were. And here, when we look at the actual story, it's quite a mix. We have Lavan is the brother of the mother, right? It's a combination. So all of these attempts to say it's one way or another are all wrong. They're all wrong. The reality was much more blurry. And actually, I've heard Rachel Elior talk about this. Professor Rachel Elior, she's a scholar. She's done a lot of research using the Dead Sea Scrolls, and she's written like a dozen books. She's a professor of Bible and history and Talmud at Hebrew University. And she talks about how in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found alternative versions of these lineage chapters, the chapters which say, and this one was the son of this, and this one had 3 sons, and their sons had sons and sons. So she said that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found versions which include mothers and include daughters. So, all of these things, like the patriarchal tradition is a choice. In other words, it was a choice. And this is the argument that she makes, that the choice to include an all-male version of the lineage is a choice to construct patriarchy, to say that, oh, our tradition will be where only men are named. Whereas throughout history, there were alternatives to that. There were alternatives to that. And here, even just the way this is described here, we see, touches of that. We see touches of how it's not clear. And like you said before, like Rachel was a ro'ah, she was a shepherd. She was working for her father. She was doing her father's work. Was that unusual? Like, we don't know. Was that unusual or was that normal? Like, we don't really know.
For example, David's the shepherd, and there were mountain lions in the terrain back then.
Mm-hmm.
There were brigands, I assume. And so it says something about either the security of the area in which she lives, or in the autonomy that the father is granting to his daughters, that he sends them off for the days with the staff in hand to beat back whatever threats there might be, and with their sheep.
Right.
So I was quite taken by that detail.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so what happens next? So what happens next is Jacob comes and he goes there and he takes the stone off. He has this big show of like macho strength, and he's going to be the chivalrous visitor who removes the stone for the women. Isn't that romantic? Isn't that a romantic gesture that he removes the stone from the mouth of the well for her? And we will try not to look too deeply into the metaphor of opening holes on behalf of the women. But okay, so then what happens next? 11. Vayishak Yaakov Rachel vayisa et kolo vayefk. Okay, this verse, this little 7-word verse, is completely unparalleled in the Bible. Yaakov kisses Rachel, and then he cries. Okay, he kisses her. He kisses her on their first meeting. Like, when you think about, the way we're taught, the way, Orthodox Judaism is taught, we have social distancing between men and women way before Corona, but the idea of like meeting the woman you're going to marry, and before you bother getting permission from her father, he kisses her, right? And then he's going to declare his love soon, right? Which we had also with Yitzchak. We learned that Yitzchak loved Rivka, but it says he learned to love her after they get married. Here, it's love at first sight. We have the super romantic story of love at first sight, and he kisses her and he cries. Now notice, of course, that she hasn't kissed him. It doesn't say that she kissed him back, and we don't know how she feels about it, just like we didn't know if Rebecca loved Yitzchak. Okay, but we do see this really very modern event that he sees her. Yeah.
And one has to be astonished, because when was the last time they had met? And how old was she when they saw each other for the last time?
They had never met. That's the point. They had never, ever met, but we don't know how old she was.
So we can assume she must have been fairly astonished, at the very least, by the flow of events.
Right. We don't know how any of the women felt about the men in their lives, in that sense that the Torah never tells us directly. Okay?
I want to ask something. Like, he kisses her, but he kisses her in the presence of other women. What kind of legal weighting does that give to his gesture?
I don't know. Excellent question. What does it mean that he's doing it in a very public place? Super public. This is the most public that you get. The well is like the community center. It couldn't be more public, basically.
Well, what I'm leading up to is this a preliminary act of possession or act of acquisition?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, it's totally an act of acquisition, which we're going to see in a second. Okay, so ויגד יעקב לרחל כי אחי אביה הוא וכי בן רבקה הוא ותרץ ותגד לאביה. So he kisses her first, and then he says, "Hi, I'm your cousin." And then she hears this, and then she goes running to tell her father. And now her father, Lavan, heard this, and he heard that Yaakov ben Achoto, his nephew, came, and he ran out to meet him. And then it says, "Vayichabek lo, v'yirashek lo, v'yivero," he hugs him and he kisses him. Okay, and then Lavan heard the whole story about everything that just happened. Vayoma lo Lavan, achatzmi, atzmi ubsariata. So he said, you're my flesh and blood, stay with me. So he stayed there for a month. Yaakov stayed there for a month. And he says, Vayoma Lavan Yaakov, hachi achi, since you are my kinsman, v'avadtani chinam, okay, you can't work for free. Hagida li ma maskortecha. Tell me what your fee is. Okay, so now
that's very interesting, because was there no normal fee, and would normally not the person giving the work be the one who sets the fee?
Right. Well, a lot of midrashim talk about Lavan as being manipulative, which they get straight from the text that's about to come, right? So Lavan, we know, is also a great manipulator. He's the one who, was about to exchange daughters, right? He promises one daughter and gives the other. So there's a lot written about Lavan and his manipulations, and how the word Lavan means white, but that's really sarcastic. He was the opposite of white. He was the opposite of straight and transparent. Okay, so you could read this whole story as him being like, oh, sure, I want to pay you. Of course, I want to pay you. Tell me, I'll pay you anything. When in fact he was about to do the opposite. He had his own idea about what he should pay you.
Well, it's also interesting that he asks after a month. What was happening in the first 30 days? Was no work being done? Or
well, he was working, because he says, what, you're already working, should you be working for free? No, clearly Yaakov was working but not getting paid. That's the implication, that he was working but not getting paid.
Yep.
Right. Okay, so verse 16. So here we have the story. The girls come in. That Lavan had two daughters. The older one was Leah, and the Tanara was Rachel. Now, notice that the girls aren't even introduced as independent. In other words, their whole lives were she's the older and she's the younger, which might be like very familiar to some people who are constructed that way in their real lives. Like, I think that in a lot of families, people are introduced as that, oh, you're so-and-so's younger sister, and that shadows, like being in someone else's shadow, is a very common experience in many families. And for a lot of people, it turns into a trauma, of sort of always never just being, like, you're never allowed to be Rachel. You're always the younger one, Rachel. And you're never allowed to be Leah. You're always the older unmarried sister, Leah, as opposed to just Leah. So you see that construct here in verse 16, and it's something that carries till today, like the many ways that parents construct identities for their children. And the next verse has even more of a construct. It says, Ve'enei Leah rakot, Rachel hayta yafat tov v'yafat barer. Okay, Leah's eyes were soft, okay? But Rachel was pretty. She was very, very pretty. Okay, so first of all, whatever we know about Leah, whatever soft eyes means, it doesn't mean pretty, because Rachel was the pretty one. So you see that construct right here. Mm-hmm. But the question is, what does Einei Leah Rakot mean? What do you think this means? Her eyes were soft. What does that mean?
Every time I've read this story, I've always interpreted it as meaning that she had some kind of eye problem. It's obviously some kind of physical defect or something that would have marked her off as being unattractive.
Right.
And
something about the opposite of attractive.
She's going through life with some kind of physical liability. But what precisely that liability is, I don't know. I think I once read a translation where they said her eyes were runny, but I couldn't think of any eye problem that corresponded to that. Then I wondered
but all of that isn't right. But Linda, everything is interpretation. Whatever interpretation you're going to read about, oh, it was runny, it was this. All we know is that she was known as the one with the eye thing.
Yeah.
Right? She had an eye thing. That's all we really know. And that the eye thing was problematic and it made her unattractive. That's all we really know. But I actually think that there might be something else also about Elana Sztokman, which is that if we're going to think about the women who came before her, like Rivka as being, smart, Rivka was really smart. She did stuff and she spoke. And Rachel was, she was strong. She in her own way. She was quiet, but she also was the shepherdess, right? She was able to command sheep, and she was the one commanding the sheep, not Leah. So I'm wondering if the Leah Rakot, whether they're also trying to say that she was a little bit dumb, that like her eyes weren't fierce, her eyes were not eyes that like commanded. They were soft. They were sort of dull. Like I'm wondering if it's a way of saying that she was considered a little bit dull, and that affected the way she was perceived also. She wasn't perceived as attractive because she didn't have any of that like fierceness about her, any of that, intelligence coming through like we saw with Rivka. What do you think?
I don't know, because there's the midrash about Lilith being the first wife, and Lilith is portrayed in the midrash as a strong figure, and a strong figure who is punished for her sharpness. Then Eve is created to be Adam's wife. So there seems to be a limit to how sharp women may be.
I think that's definitely true.
You're doing a transferred. You're transferring the idea here from physical to intellectual, like not so much her eyes per se, but how she sees the world, and there's something off, maybe not tough enough for the real world as it is. We'd have to know, for example, was she trusted enough to send outside with a flock of sheep to take care of the sheep for the day? This might give us some idea of how much her skills were how her skills were assessed within the family. It's possible. She comes across as in the story as being a dull and uninteresting character. She is the good wife without any personality. She just takes whatever life offers her.
Right. I see that also. Sort of the one who like doesn't have any of that, that excitability. She's dulled. Yeah. But again, these are all this is where we read our own life experiences into the story, because there is so much missing from this tale. There is so much.
The problem is the narrator of this tale isn't really interested in her. She's a prop to the main story. So we'll never know who Leah really was.
Right, exactly.
And
that is it. That is the message from all of these stories, by the way, is that we really have no idea.
So many girls are named after Leah. And I've often wondered, what were the parents thinking when they chose the name?
Well,
I can understand choosing Rachel. I have some qualms about the choice of Leah, even if she is one of the four mothers.
Right, because our tradition, when you're looking at it from the patriarchal perspective, which says the woman's job is to be the mother of the nation, Leah did that. She was the quintessential mother of the nation. And if that's all we want from women, she did an outstanding job, better than anyone else. She had more children than anyone else. And so if we see women as playing that function, Leah is a great model. It's only if you see women as whole beings, it's only if you see women as whole people with life experiences, and you start to ask these questions about what was she experiencing in life, that you might ask the question, you say like, well, what was Leah? What was her personality? What was her character? What were her emotional reactions? Who was she in this world? And then you realize we know so little. We know so little about her, other than that she was known as the ugly older sister who had an eye issue, who couldn't get married apparently, who was having trouble getting married, so her father had to sneak her into a wedding. That's all we know about her so far, right? But that's not important. If you're telling the story from that patriarchal perspective, and what I was saying before about what Rachel and Leah teaches, Professor Rachel and Leah teaches, which is that how the story is told is a choice. And so the way Genesis includes the stories from a patriarchal perspective, that is a choice. So the book has an agenda. The book has a patriarchal agenda. Okay, let's keep going. We're going to
have a question. What
Okay.
do the names mean? The names, Leah and Rachel. I thought Leah was a wild cow or something, but I'm not sure if my memory is correct.
I'm not really sure.
Because that's something we'd have to look into, because
Right.
the name is so significant. The name is the thing. So what do the names mean in this case?
Right. So I don't have an answer to that, but we can definitely look into that later on. Okay, let's keep reading. So verse 18 also takes us to unprecedented places biblically, right? Where it says, Ve'ahav Yaakov et Rachel, Yaakov loved Rachel. So again, we saw that the text said that Yitzchak loved Rivka, but that was only after they were married. But here we have what is an actual courtship, where they met and he kissed her and he fell in love with her. Now, it's still a patriarchal courtship because she has no say. She didn't do any of the kissing back and she hasn't said anything yet, right? So it's all, Yaakov falling in love with her. But still, it does use the word love, which I think is really significant, because we tend to think of, patriarchal structures as being all arranged marriages. But this is a love marriage. This is a love marriage. I mean, it started out with a purpose of an arranged marriage, but it was a man going to a public place, seeing a girl, falling in love with her, and saying, I want to marry her. So that's really progressive in a certain sense within patriarchal frameworks. Okay, so he goes to Lavan and he says, I will work for you for 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And also, this was also progressive because it violated the norms of saying, okay, the older daughter has to get married first, which we're going to see right here. Of course, I want to give it to you. Okay, but the whole time he was actually lying about that, because what he really wanted was to get his older daughter married first, as social norms would dictate, social convention. So for 7 years, he has his younger daughter betrothed, and his older daughter, he can't, oops, hang on, are you there? I lost my, hang on. Hang on. Okay, I lost my video for a sec. Hang on, I don't know why I lost my video. Can you see me? Hang on. I can't hear you and I can't see you. 1 second.
Now you can hear me.
Can you see me?
I can see you.
Oh, you can see me. Okay.
Can you see me? My video is on.
Okay. My video disappeared, but okay, never mind. You can see me, so I guess we'll leave it at that. Hang on a second. Okay, I'm gonna. Hang on. Okay. Okay. So what happens at the end of these 7 years? Yaakov thinks he's working for 7 years for the daughter, but at the end, what happens? He says, "Okay, come. I've done my job. Give me my wife. Hava et ishti. Give me my wife. Ki maluya ma'ava avo eleha. It's time for me to take her as my wife." And so Lavan made a big party. He made a big wedding. But instead, in that night, he took Leah and gave her to Yaakov, and he gave her a second woman just for as a bonus. We hear Vayitay Lavan la et Zilpa shifchato, Leah bito shifcha. She gave Yaakov an extra wife. Okay, and then the next morning, suddenly he says, "Oh my God, it's Leah. It's not Rachel." And then he gets all upset. Mazot asita li, hello, Rachel avadati imcha v'lama mimitani. He says, "Oh my God, what have you done? This is not our arrangement. I wanted Rachel and not Leah." Okay, so what is the mind-boggling part of this story? Let's say, as a woman, as someone reading the story, what's the mind-boggling part about how this all happened? How did Yaakov not realize when he was having sex with this woman that it wasn't the woman who he loved? How come it took him all night and it wasn't until the sun came up that he suddenly realized this was Leah and not Rachel? How did that happen?
Well, I'm sure there's an explanation. They'll probably say he was drunk or something and he couldn't tell the difference. I mean, that is a detail that has always stunned me too. And I've also wondered about Lavan, like Lavan as the father of a daughter who is unmarriageable is an act of mercy on his part that he pulls this deception on his nephew. And then there's the feelings of Leah, who seems to love her husband and puts up with a lot of really disadvantaged behavior from his part.
Well, this is a big question. We don't know in the story what Leah was thinking or what Rachel was thinking. Did they object? Did they resist? Were they in on it? I mean, there are lots of different possibilities. But clearly they knew what the deal was. Clearly, it was supposed to be Rachel getting married. So Leah participated in this. And what was that like for her? What was the wedding night like for her when she was pretending to be Rachel? Also, we can contrast this story with the story about how Yaakov deceived his father and pretended to be Esau. So for that deception, we have an entire chapter of detailed description about how that particular deception took place. What was the role of the mother in creating it? She said, grab the food, do this with the food, and do this with your hands, and do this with the clothes, and say this. We have a lot of work there. And here we have basically the same type of dynamic of Lavan sending his daughter in, pretending to be someone else in order to deceive someone else in the dark. It's the same kind of story, but we have half a sentence about it. We don't know how it was done. We don't, and also with Yaakov, we know a little bit that he was reluctant. He was listening to his mother, but he also was sort of saying to his mother, "I don't think this is really going to work. It's not going to work." But we understand with Yaakov that whatever feelings he may have had, he put them all aside and said, "Okay, I'm doing this." Whereas we don't have any conversation at all about Rachel, about Leah, about what their roles were. Did Leah want to do this? Was she unhappy being the older daughter who was not married? How did she feel about her younger sister getting engaged before her? Did she care because she was supposed to be married first?
One minute.
Yeah.
Where's the reference that they were engaged?
They had 7 years. He said in 7 years you can marry her.
If they had been engaged, would he not have been allowed to cohabit with her?
I think that you might be applying later rules, later contractual rules. All those contractual rules came many, many generations later. So
anyway, let's say the wedding night was a setup, and it was a setup because we can assume, for example, that Leah was veiled. Maybe she wore a face veil. We saw only Well, interesting. Maybe she was wearing more than a face veil. So he married her.
But they spent the night together.
And then there was some kind of feast, and she was with the women and he was with the men. And then it was nighttime and the tent was dark. And meanwhile, because she was getting married, she had been probably bathed and scrubbed and perfumed and whatnot. And maybe, to stretch our imaginations a little further, she's the same height and body build as her sister.
Even though we're told very clearly that Rachel was the beautiful one and Leah was not. So clearly they had to be distinct.
Rachel is pretty, and it's the pretty face. Remember, everyone's wearing these long clothes, so we don't know what their bodies look like beyond generalities.
On the other hand, Yaakov was dreaming about marrying Rachel for 7 years. For 7 years, they were in the same household. He's looking at her, and he's working really hard in order to say, that is the girl who I love. Right? It says he loved her, he chose her, he wants to marry her, he kissed her. But he doesn't recognize her after spending a night with her sister instead of her. He doesn't know the difference. I mean, it is just, there is something wrong with the story. And what's wrong with the story is that we are completely missing all those details about what it took to carry out that deception. Because whereas the stories of Yaakov and Esav are considered interesting in this patriarchal framework, what they went through, what they felt, what they did is considered interesting. What women did, what women felt is just, when it's just for themselves, like for the purpose of trying to understand women's actual lives, it is just not interesting to the biblical narrator. It's just not considered interesting. And that's really the lesson here. The lesson here is that women's lives in of themselves are just not considered interesting enough. They're just not considered interesting. There's no reason why we would get all the details about Yaakov's deception and nothing about how Leah and Rachel felt. Other than the fact that women's lives just simply aren't interesting. Okay, should we keep going?
We should.
Yeah,
because one of the things that I've always wondered is, well, two things. First, that he didn't repudiate Leah.
Yeah.
And then second, let's say he didn't repudiate her because he still wanted to pursue his primary goal, which was a marriage with Rachel.
Yeah.
And he still treats Leah as a wife. He doesn't just set her aside and turn her into a household domestic, which could have been another option of her future life. She becomes a full wife.
Right. Well, what's interesting, which also is interesting here, is that he's given the shvachot, he's given the concubines, and while they're called concubines, they become the four mothers. And those who are four mothers, Sarah, really, we talk about the four mothers as Sarah, Rachel, Leah, but really, who are the mothers of the 12 tribes? We have four mothers for the 12 tribes. It's Rachel, Leah, Zilpah, and Bilhah. Zilpah and Bilhah, who are the concubines, are actually mothers of the nation. Even though so they did gain some like eternal status somewhere, but they were concubines. They were given the night of a wedding as like a present. Okay, let's go back. My niece is joining us. She's sitting here in the room, who's here from Australia. Okay.
Hello, niece.
Yeah, she's not on the screen. She's here at the table with me. Okay. You want to sit next to me? Yeah. Okay. We're looking at the screen. We're looking at the Tzedakah screen. Okay. So we're in We're in chapter 29, Kaftet, and we're in verse 26. Okay, so Vayomer Lavan lo yaseh ken bimkomeno lateta tzira lefnei bechira. And here we have Lavan saying, social convention comes before love. You may have loved you may have loved my daughter, but this is how we do things here. We marry the first one before the second, which, by the way, still exists in a lot of places today, that girls can't get engaged until their oldest is engaged. That's still a thing. Okay, so they go through the whole thing again. He says, Malay Shvuah Zot, complete the Shvuah can be a week, but it can also be the vow. So it's either, fulfill the vow that you made with this one or fulfill the week. And then I'll give you the second one. You could have Rachel for another 7 years. And so Vayas Yaakov Ken, Vayimaleh Shvuah Zot, he filled this week or he filled this vow, however you want to read it. Vayitem lo et Rachel bito lo isha, and then he got Rachel. And then Vayitem Lavan lo Rachel bito et Bilha shivchato la shivcha. So now, instead of having his love, Rachel, he's got 4 wives, or 2 wives and 2 concubines, and they become the mother of the nation. And then finally, after the second 7 years, or some people say that it may not have been the 7 years, it might have been after a week, and then he just had to work another 7 years after that. But he loved Rachel more than Leah. Okay, so that he worked, in other words, he finished the week, he got married again, and he worked for another 7 years. Okay, so here we have this really difficult story now of 2 sisters married to the same guy, and only one of them is loved. Very clearly. There's no hiding, just like we were talking the other day about how all of Genesis is about playing favorites. Here we have the same thing of playing favorites, and how much that playing favorites causes generations of pain. Okay, and not only the played favorites, but it becomes extreme. In verse 31, we have Vayav Hashem ki snu'ah Leah. She was hated. Yaakov hated her. Okay, now again, even though we can start to now understand a little bit of what Leah might have been going through, because we can understand what it means to feel like the one who is not pretty, she's not the pretty one, she's known as the one with the dull eyes, she couldn't get engaged, she couldn't even, her father couldn't pay somebody to marry her, the only way that she could get married was through this deception, and now we have it written clearly, she was hated. Okay, so we don't know anything else about Leah. Leah has not spoken, Rachel has not spoken, Leah has not spoken, but we can imagine what her life experience might have been in these circumstances. So,
okay, now, who's doing the hating?
Well, it's presumably Yaakov. But it's an excellent question. It's a passive voice. In other words, the text gives it to us in passive that she was hated, not that Yaakov sana. She became the hated one. So it could be that society hated her. It could be that society looked at her as, oh, she was the one who couldn't get married. Oh, she's the one who wasn't really wanted. She was the one who had to be, deceptively given away. She couldn't even get a husband on her own. All of those things. So according to the text, now God felt mercy on her by Yiftach et Rachma. And God, in order to sort of restore some kind of justice against this terrible deception that Lavan did, and the fact that, she's married to a man who doesn't want her, God gave her a different present. And what is that present? Something that presumably women want. And again, it's this assumption that all women really want is either a husband or children, preferably both, but if she can't get a husband that loves her, at the very least, she'll get something else that all women want, right? That's the assumption. All women want children. So here they're going to give her children, right? Which, of course, raises a whole bunch of questions for us. Is that true? Is it true that women want nothing else other than to be mothers, or either have a man who loves them or have children who love her? And what does that say about, what are the reasons why women have children? Why do women choose to become mothers? Do they choose to become mothers because, they want to feel loved? Do they choose to have children because they want their husbands to love them? Or do they choose to have children because they want to be that vehicle for, carrying on generations as Leah becomes, the mother for generations, the one to have all those tribes? Or is there something here, is the text saying something here about essential reasons why women want to become mothers? That every woman, no matter who she is, no matter what her talents are, what her skills are, she obviously wants nothing more than to become a mother, right?
Well, in tribal society, the woman becomes the mother has more prestige and more power
Status.
than the woman who hasn't born a child.
Right. So here we see that very clearly. Here we see that one way for a woman to have status is for her to be the favorite wife. Another way for a woman to have status is to have children. And then having children.
And not just any children, a son.
A
The
son,
firstborn son.
firstborn son, and lots and lots of sons. The more sons you have, the more status you have. Okay, so all of these are realities of women's lives. So it's hard for us to say for sure that, oh yes, women naturally want to have children when we have this reality in history, which is that the only way a woman could possibly maybe get attention of a husband who she might have wanted some affection from was to bear him a lot of sons. So that's this reality here also. Okay, so now we have the whole story about how she had one child after another. First, she had the first son whose name was Reuben, Ki Hashem be'oni, God saw my suffering. Ki ata yehavani ishi. Now my man will love me. My husband will love me. That is what she really wanted. So she had a son exactly, the text says it exactly. If I have this son, now my husband will love me. But that didn't happen. Next, she has another son, and she called him Shimon ki snua anochi. She understands, no, I really am hated. And so she calls him Shimon. Maybe this time my husband will come to me because I have 3 sons. So he called him Levi, Lilavot, to accompany him. Still praying. All she wanted was some love from her husband. That didn't happen. Yeah, it's sad. This is a very sad story. Okay, I'm going to thank God for all these children. And that's it. She called him Yudah, and she stopped bearing children. Okay, now let's also understand the first time we see Leah, the first time we hear Leah talk is when she names her children. So she is speaking to the world through the name she gives to her children. Because Leah's narrative of what she's experiencing in life comes through these half sentences that she gives to her sons. That's all we have. Okay, let's move on to the next chapter. That's the end of chapter 29. Now we're going to move to chapter 30, Perek Lamed. Okay, so the story, it's really one story. It's not separate chapters. So now we have Rachel's side of the story. So Leah's having one child after another, praying for her husband to notice her. And it didn't happen, so she gave up for now. And now we have Rachel. Vater Rachel ki lo yalda Yaakov. And the whole time, what does Rachel want? She wants what her sister has. She just wants a little bit of what her sister has, which is a child. Vatikane Rachel ba'achota. Now, this again is one of the few times here in Bereshit, in Genesis, where we have an emotion attributed to a woman. With all the things that are happening, this is the first time in this story where the text tells us what one of the women was actually feeling. And what's the feeling? Jealousy. And what's fascinating is that we're told that Rachel was jealous of Leah. Whereas, why did the text tell us with the first 4 boys, clearly Leah was jealous of Rachel too, right? Leah, all Leah wanted was her husband's love, but she doesn't get attributed jealousy. Who gets attributed the jealous one? Rachel. As if to say, oh, what do women really want? Again, this message, what do women really want more than anything? They want a child. Okay? And what do we have Rachel say? The first time Rachel is talking, we haven't heard Rachel's voice. The first thing she says, V'tomer Yaakov, hava li banim, get me a son, im ayin meta anochi. If not, I am dead. I feel dead inside. Okay, now remember that we had other stories of the Akarot, right? We had Sarah who told Abraham, I want a child. And what was his solution? Here, I'll give you another wife. Okay, I'll take another wife, then I'll have a child with her instead. But that was Sarah's idea. Sarah said, here, take my concubine, have a baby, and it'll be like mine. So that was done. And then afterwards, we have the story about Sarah getting all rankled and resentful. So we have that story. Then we have Rivka, who didn't even have to say she was hurting. Yitzchak went to God and said, God, you have to give my wife a baby. She's suffering. which was a beautiful act of love, right? Remember, we saw that story. We also looked at the story of Hannah, right? Hannah and Penina, the wives of Elkanah, and how Hannah said basically the same thing. She was crying and she was praying. And what did Elkanah say? Aren't I better? Aren't I better? Then, and you made that really beautiful comment at the time. You said, well, you see, he's trying to say to her, let's value our relationship. It's, she said, no, I really want a child, and she was crying. So that's very similar here. So now we want to ask, okay, with all of these different possible reactions, what was Yaakov's reaction when Rachel said, Hava li banim v'im ayin meta anochi? I need you to get me a child. If not, I feel like I'm dead inside. What happens in Pasuk Bet? Vayichar af Yaakov b'Rachel. He gets angry at her. And why does he get angry at her? He says, Vayomar, Hatachat Elohim anochi? What is it, my fault? What are you blaming me? Okay, so our very first...
Isn't it more than just that? Isn't there, I mean, the fact that she doesn't have children, isn't there a kind of moral problem underlying her barrenness? I mean, I'm trying to analyze his anger, and in a way, it's an interesting exchange, because you wonder if he thinks he's being blamed for her childlessness, and then you wonder if he thinks maybe there's something in her that's resulting in God's punishing her by not giving her children.
Well, what seems clear is that they all understand, well, the women understand that this is sort of like fate, that this is something from God, right? And like with Rivka and Yitzchak, right, one generation earlier, as soon as Rivka couldn't have children, Yitzchak went straight to God and said, God, give my wife a child, and God gave her a child. So that's their story. That's their origin story. And here, Yaakov, who was the product of that story, just denies that whole heritage, that whole, family legacy, and says, what, it's not my fault. I can't do anything about it, which is like also crushing, because he supposedly loved her, right? We have all this stuff. He worked so hard for her. He worked 14 years, he went through all of this. The text says he loved her, but did he really? Did he really? Did he really? We understand from what Yitzchak did to Rivka, when Yitzchak saw his wife suffering and said, I'm going to do whatever it takes to alleviate my wife's suffering. And Yaakov does exactly the opposite. He sits on his hands and says, what do you want from me? It's not my fault. Leave me alone. So what we're seeing here is two very opposite relationships. Both are given the word love in the text, which is like really unusual. And here we had this very progressive modern courtship. They met, he saw her, he kissed her, he fought for her, he wanted her, they broke social convention, all of that. But Tachlis, he's a little bit abusive. This exchange is emotional abuse. This is classic emotional abuse, where the woman says to her husband, I am in pain, I am hurting, help me. And instead of giving her empathy, he responds with anger.
Okay, but let's try a variant plot line, okay? So Yaakov wanted to marry Rachel, but he didn't get Rachel, he got Leah. Now, he didn't really want Leah, because we're told there's all sorts something undesirable about her, but he stuck with her. So he makes the best of a bad situation, and he works another 7 years. He's able to marry Rachel. Then we find out that Leah was hated, and we don't find out who's doing the hating. Right. But maybe it's Rachel who's doing the hating. Mm-hmm. And this is why Leah gets the kiddies, and this is why the handmaid afterwards is about to get the kiddies. But because Rachel couldn't adjust to the situation, because she had this kind of, maybe she had a monogamous claim or a monogamous need that had been overturned by the reality of the situation. She doesn't get the children.
So that's a really, I'm really intrigued by your reading about Snuah that it was Rachel who did the hating, because the text is definitely vague about who did the hating. And the text is much more definitive about Rachel being jealous. She was jealous, and Leah was hated. So could it be that the younger sister was needling her big sister? Ha 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 ha! You know, I got a man, you didn't. Ha ha ha! He loves me, he doesn't love you.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Tari? My niece is sitting next to me. You want to come next to me?
Hello. Yeah. What do I think about it? Well, I think also that there's a lot of stuff left out of the Tanakh in terms of their relationship. And like, it even seems like quite an extreme thing to say, like, unless I die, like if I don't have kids, I'll die. So maybe there was more going on before that warranted him being upset. Not so sure though.
So it could be that he was angry about that whole dynamic, about that whole, what you were describing, Linda, about the hated, being hated. Okay, let's keep reading. Let's read a little bit more. Okay, so she said, "Vatomer hine amati bilha." Oh, did I not? Let me share the screen again. Do you need me to share the screen, right?
Right.
Okay, hang on a second. Yeah, here you go. Sorry. Okay. Right. So here we go. So, vatiten lo et bilha shifchata liisha vayavor alei Yaakov. And so now she pulls a Sarah. Right, she does what Sarah did with Hagar and says, okay, have my maidservant instead of me, and then if she has a baby, it'll be like as if it's mine. So they tried this. Okay, so Rachel said, okay, Rachel. Now notice, it wasn't Bilhah who gave the name, it was Rachel who gave the name. So she's doing this, this thing. She's carrying it out to the. It's the handmaid's tale way of having a baby, where it's just like, this woman had a baby instead of me, so that baby is like mine. So she called him Dan because it was. She said, God has given me a son. Vayeten li ben. She considers it her son. Okay, which again, Bilhah, as opposed to also Hagar, we learned about how Hagar experienced that, and Hagar was in a lot of pain from being abused by Sarah. Here with Bilhah, we don't know anything about her. And all we know is that she had a baby, and Rachel took her and made the son her own. And that we take this, and Dan was one of the 12 tribes. And then again, it happened a second time. And the next one was Naphtali. Okay, he says, Vatama Rachel and Naphtali. Okay, Dan and Naphtali were children of Bilhah, Rachel's concubine, who Rachel took as her own because she couldn't have children. We know nothing about Bilhah. We know nothing about Bilhah's experience. Okay, and we know that Rachel was still, what was she feeling better now that her maidservant had these children? Like, what did Rachel experience from all this? All we know is that Rachel named those two children and gave those and considered those her own, and that we have carried those two names as tribes. Dan and Naphtali are tribes. So this happened. This is the origin of the Jewish people, is in this story, which is a little bit twisted. Okay, now, so what happens next? The jealousy keeps going the other direction. So now Leah is watching all this, and she said, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do the same thing Rachel did, because I am not having children right now for whatever reason. And she gave Yaakov Zilpah. And so Yaakov took Zilpah, the other concubine, and she said, and Zilpah also had not one, but two sons, who Leah named. Leah called them Gad. Right? The next one was Asher. Okay, because now suddenly she has good fortune. Girls and not just men. Ki ishruni banot. Leah's language of naming her sons tells us so much about what was going on in Leah's life. Okay, now that Leah had 4 sons of her own, and now 2 by her concubine, girls in the town were saying, wow, Leah is so lucky. Her fortune has changed. Okay, so all of this is the origin of the 12 tribes. And it's really not such a happy story, which is amazing that this is how we, this is what we consider our 12 tribes.
Okay, but it's it's an interesting contrast to that other sibling story of Cain and Abel, which ends in death. Here, at least, you end up in this competition, in this fertility competition to see who can produce the most sons.
Yes, very interesting. It's definitely competition. The entire book of Genesis is sibling competition. Sibling competition for sons over their father's affection, and for women over their husbands, for their husband's affection. Okay, so now what happens when this competition gets taken to the next generation? It gets passed down to the next generation, and we have Reuben, the oldest son, who now goes and acts on his mother's behalf. He went into the field and he found these dudaim, which were considered a flower of fertility. And he gave them to his mother. And Rachel says to Leah, give me your dudaim. Okay? Now, what are dudaim really? Like, what is it a metaphor for? I think it could be a metaphor for a lot of things, but let's take it at face value for now that it was something valuable. Okay, now, what is significant about verses 14 and 15, given our very first question about the Bechdel test? Here we have the first time in the text where the women are talking to each other. We have not yet seen the women, we've barely seen them talk at all. And now for the first time, after they have, between the two of them, they have 8 children. And now suddenly we hear them talk. And what are the things they say? Rachel says to Leah, Tani na li mi dudaim b'nech, 5 words, give me from your son's dudaim. And now, and then she says, Vatomala hama'at kachtech et ishi v'lakach gam et dudaim b'ni. Okay. So who said? So this is Leah talking, right? So what does Leah say? Hama'at kachtech et ishi v'lakach gam et dudaim b'ni. 9 words. She says, is it not enough that you've taken my husband? You're going to now also take my fertility flowers or whatever it is, some kind of romantic, it's these important flower. And so what does Rachel say? Okay, you, and now they make this exchange. She says, you can sleep with our husband tonight if I can have the dudaim. Okay, so this is the first time we're hearing these women talk to each other. What do we make of this exchange? What do we know about them from this exchange?
Well, we know it's a very unequal relationship. We know that Leah is very resentful. We know that Rachel tries to assert her superior position over Leah. It's nasty.
Yeah.
It's first wife and second wife, and we know who the preferred wife is.
Right.
But now we have another verse coming up, which is just fascinating.
Yeah. Okay, just one second. I just want to, before we go on to the next one, I just want to point out something really fascinating in verse 15. It says, Hama'at kachtech et ishi, right? Meaning that Leah considers Yaakov her husband. She considers herself the legitimate wife. So that even though, according to our text, you know, the way the story is told, Rachel was supposed to be the real wife, right? Rachel was the one who was fought for. But Leah doesn't see it that way. Leah sees herself as the one who deserved the husband, and she sees Rachel as having stolen her husband. Okay,
well,
so that's...
Leah is the first wife.
Right.
And in a tribal society, the first wife is supposed to have the authority over the other wives. And nothing
had status. Right. So she lost her status. She lost her status as the older sister, and she lost her status as the prime wife. But she she seemed to have gotten it back, you know, right? Because it says, you know, when she had Asher, that she said, you know, the people of the girls of the town now respect me. but the resentment goes deep, and they're still hanging on to it. So let's go on to verse 16, right? ויבוא יעקב מן השדה בערב, ותצא לאל לקראתו, ותאמר אלי, תבוא כי שכרתיך, I have earned you, okay? Which is very reminiscent of the way Yaakov earned, right, Leah? In other words, here we see in marriage is something you pay for. You have to like pay the price to get who you want, like that. So,
and verse 16 also shows a point I was trying to argue earlier, where even within the patriarchy, there's certain limits. Like Leah's not afraid to come out and say, you're sleeping with me tonight because I bought you,
right,
with the flowers, whatever the dudaim are.
right.
And apparently she feels strong enough or validated enough by the society to tell him what he's going to have to do that evening.
So in some ways, the story tells us a lot about what was going on in the society, but it's possible that the story also broke norms, right? The story also broke norms because, because it started out with agency and progressive love marriage, but in the end, we're learning a lot about what patriarchal norms were all around.
Maybe it's teaching us that sentiment only goes so far, and at some point you start hitting your head against the wall of social reality.
Right, which is what happened with Rivka also. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going because it's already we're sort of going slowly tonight, which is okay. Let's move a little bit through the text. Okay, so after this we have more births. Right after this whole story with the Dudaim, Leah had more children. She had Yisachar, and then she had Zvulun, and then she had Dinah, and Dinah was her seventh. And it was only after all this that it says, "Vayiskor Elohim et Rachel, vayishma elei Elohim, vayiftach et Rachma." So what's really important here is that, first of all, it's interesting that Dinah is mentioned, even though presumably there were other girls, because later on it says that Yaakov had daughters, not just one daughter. So I think it's planting Dinah here because we have a Dinah story coming up. But besides that, what we have here is that so that even though Rachel did give her concubines, at the end of the day, even that was not really enough. Dan and Naphtali, that Bilhah gave birth to on behalf of Rachel, really was not the same as Rachel having her own children. That's the message here. But the message here is that finally, Rachel has an actual child of her own, which she has. First she has Yosef, and then afterwards, and then later on she has Binyamin on the road, right? For now she just has Yosef, and she has Yosef and she's happy. Now, what's really important here is that all of this is context for Yosef's birth. So all of this backdrop to Yosef would explain why Yosef was so preferred. He was so much the preferred son, because look at all that had to happen in order for him to come into the world. And that him being in the world was, some kind of resolution of Rachel and of Yaakov's love for Rachel. It's what Yaakov had originally wanted. Yosef became the favorite because all that he had dreamed of through all of these years and all of these births was to have a love child with Rachel. So Yosef was this dream, and that came around after all of this jealousy and resentment and competitions and purchasing of love and all of that. So if we want to understand what's going to happen in later chapters, between Yosef and his brothers, you have to understand the story about how he came into the world. Anyway, there's more to this story, and there's the whole story about when Binyamin was born and how Rachel died. But this is pretty much all we have of the relationship between, Rachel and Leah. And so the question that I want to go back to is the question that we started with, right? The Bechdel test. Okay, the Bechdel test is a really low bar. to answer the question about whether a particular text or a particular story has even the most minimal understanding of women's lives and of the possibility for women to have experiences that are not expressed solely by the patriarchal glass. Okay, so the criteria for the Bechdel test are there two women who have a conversation that lasts longer than 30 seconds that is not about a man. That's the Bechdel test. And so when I ask this question in groups, like I ask this very often in different groups, and usually we're asking the question about, Ruth and Naomi, okay? Because Ruth and Naomi answers the question. There we have two women having an actual relationship, which is part of the reason what makes Ruth and Naomi such a powerful story is because it is an actual story about friendship between women, about love between women. Now,
and here we have two women playing sexual politics over who's going to have the right to sleep with the man.
And the question is, do we count Rachel and Leah as women who are given a deep treatment, women whose characters are explored as whole beings, as beings who have something beyond, fighting over a man? What do you think, Carrie?
Well, I think the Tanakh is usually very vague about certain things and about a lot of things, and I think characters often aren't explored and probably on purpose, but it's unfortunate that they're not explored more, but then it also kind of makes sense that they're not. Yeah.
But some characters are explored. Like what I was saying before is that the other day when we were looking at the Rivka story, so that one little story about how Yaakov prepared for the deception, where he went and he got food and he had conversations with Rivka and then he put the stuff on his hands and he put the clothes on. We have lots and lots of descriptive detail about that.
Yeah.
And we have nothing of that caliber here.
Yeah. I think also, if you look at the way that the stories are done in both times, they're all in relation to Yaakov's. The first story is that's all needed to get an understanding of Yaakov as a character and as a person, but the interactions between the wives here doesn't really help add to Yaakov, which it's an issue that there isn't more written about the women, but in a text like the Torah, which was obviously that story would have occurred in a patriarchal time period. It kind of makes sense.
Right.
But
is it possible, but this is a big question, is this story also about Yaakov? Is this story, the way the story is told, is it a story about Rachel and Leah, or is it a story about Yaakov?
Yeah. I think it's about them.
You think it's about them?
Yeah.
What do you think it has to say about them?
I don't know. I haven't really thought about it that much. Yeah.
What about you, Linda?
Well, for me, it's a story about them because his role is reduced to being the progenitor. He's very interesting up to the point where he has the argument about, am I to blame for the fact that God has decided you're not to have children? And at that point, it becomes a story between the two sisters. And I'm actually quite surprised because it's very nuanced with a lot of details. And
details about how they chose their names.
The different ways in which they carried out their rivalry in couched terms, they physically fight. It came out to symbolic actions.
Right.
So, and when I think
that if we do say
normally I read 17th century stuff, and it's not as refined as this. This is quite subtle.
Nice. I do think, though, within what we know about the women, their characters, as much as we do have some insight into some of their real pains, some of their jealousies, and some of their angers, and some of their ambitions, and how much Leah just wanted the girls of the town to say something nice about her, that's very real, or how much she just wanted a little love from her husband, how much she felt like she was entitled to a husband, that he was really hers, and whether or not Rachel even reciprocated what she had, what we are told about Yaakov. We don't know if she ever really loved him the way he loved her. Like, we don't really know about that. We know more about the jealousy she had of Leah than we do about how she felt about Yaakov. So, in as much as we have some insights into their emotional lives, these insights that we have are trapped within the confines of patriarchal practices. And again, it's all told from the perspective of the purpose of the narrative to explain how the blessing was transmitted and why, there was tension with Yosef and his brothers. Meaning all of this feels a little bit like a setup for the story of Yosef and his brothers, which of course becomes, a massive story about Yetziat Mitzrayim, how he ended up in exile for 400 years. Like, all of this is a story to explain how Israel came about. So that's why it feels to me like a lot of details are missing, because the story is more about women than maybe, Rivka. Like, we know more about Rachel and Leah's emotional lives than we do about Rivka's emotional lives. Like, we still don't know why Rivka loved Yaakov more than Esav. We don't know why she did all that deception. Whereas here in the Leah and Rachel story, we have some insights into what the women were feeling and what they were going through and what was motivating them. But again, it's all within these confines of how their societies and the men in their lives constructed them as needing a husband and needing children in order to have any kind of status in society, and in order for the women of the town to say something nice about them, in order, that Rachel said, if I don't have children, I might as well be dead. Where does that come from, like that?
Well, I would ask, what does that mean? I mean, children are your flesh and blood, and is she saying, if I don't have children, the person that I am and the body that I am will cease to exist with me when I die? It's the whole idea of, continuing the name and continuing the parent. And I'm not sure whether we should take this "I will be dead" literally or figuratively. Like, what level are we supposed to read deadness at?
Right. That's a really interesting point. Okay. Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you, Tari, for being here.
Thank you.
And
Nice to meet
Thank
you.
you so much for spending a close, intimate hour and a half, or however long we were talking, because I really appreciate that.
My
now
pleasure.
I can go back and face coronavirus with equanimity for the next few days.
Good luck with that. The next chapter we'll talk about the Dina story on Sunday or Monday. Which is of course a story about rape or seduction and love and brothers and sisters. So that's next week. Thank you, Linda. Okay. Feel good. Good luck with Corona and with your isolation. And
bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.